may start. All right. There's an echo. It's muted. Should I remove this? Should I remove it? Is this better? Okay. Okay. Great. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our second Imbizo on the township economy. We continue to have a conversation with various parties regarding the issue relating to the rebuilding, restoring, and revitalizing of the township economy. Today is the second Imbizo, as I indicated. Last week we had about 1,500 people across the country in a lot of townships across South Africa joining us for this very important discussion around how do we unlock this sleeping giant that is the township economy. It has been stated that 60% of the South African population still lives in townships. And to the extent that there isn't sufficient productive activity in these areas, then it means we as a country will never fully realize our economic potential. And I think the levels of inequality, which are already very high according to world standards, will continue to persist. So ABSIP has been of the view for some time that there is an urgent need for a conversation to take place around how do we deliberately and intentionally ensure that we create a supportive ecosystem for the creation, for the development, and then enablement of a successful township economy. And a lot came out of the discussion we had last week. I mean, last week we were quite intent on ensuring that we let the communities that live in the townships themselves surface for us so that we can better understand the issues that they face on a daily basis as either aspiring entrepreneurs or existing entrepreneurs. And we were quite intentional in ensuring that we let them speak and we do not seek to impose or suggest solutions to the problems that they know better than we do. But we were there as a listening ear to ensure that the entrepreneurs themselves living in these economies and the townships help us to better understand what the correct solutions are, or rather what the barriers are, what are the things that make it difficult for them to succeed as they endeavor in the various things that they seek to do. And quite a lot came out. The discussion today then, of course, focuses on one of the key themes that came out of this first discussion. And I would say that, you know, there were at least 4 very strong themes that were quite evident and needed to be followed up on by ABSIP. Because I must just say, like I did the last time we spoke, that we as ABSIP are here to facilitate, but more importantly, we are here to see how we match or how we find the right partnerships, firstly to ensure that we unlock and therefore we realize our full potential. So the 4 themes that came out were around regulatory constraints, both at a municipal level as well as a provincial and government level. And what that means is that people firstly, on the one hand, feel that our regulations that are seeking to support entrepreneurs are not really reflective, or rather they do not show an understanding of the socio-economic situation that we face as a country or the reality on the ground. So the policies are said to be world standard policies. Others argue that perhaps the policies are more relevant to more developed economies. And the reality in South Africa is that we still have two economies, and we are talking to the second economy that also wants to realize their full potential. So a need to really have a regulatory look and review to say, are our regulations realistic? Are they reflective of the environment and the economy that we operate in? There were also issues around municipal bylaws and the fact that, again, the relevance of our municipal bylaws is under question because very many businesses in the township are already flagrant of those laws because just structurally, the way townships are made up, the way that our properties are literally on top of each other, you're already you're already in local leaders at a municipality level actually come up with regulations that address the real issues that are relevant to the businesses in the townships. There was also, a very big conversation around access to markets, access to supply chains, or lack thereof. There was a view, for instance, that some of them built in the town, on one hand, for the first time, we see investment in infrastructure in towns taking place. They actually dispute the township business. And for one reason or the other, the township business, instead of being incorporated to the supply chains of the businesses in those malls, actually were rendered no longer relevant and therefore had to close shop. So we need to talk about these things. We also need to be talking about how serious are we as a country and send as many comments as possible via the Zoom Q&A link. I would at this point like to welcome DJ Shimza onto the stage, who is our host, to just give us a few remarks, and then I'll come back to introduce our next speaker. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Ashley Rapala. I am born and bred in Tembisa. My profession brought me was the entrepreneurial space. I started off as just a DJ, and those dreams formed the entrepreneur that I am today. I am a DJ by profession, and yes, DJing is a profession, by the way. I'm an artist, I'm a producer, and I have a production company in the music business. I have an entertainment and lifestyle my events, which ultimately of my career brought me into the restaurant business. And that's why we are here where we are today, which is the Hangout in Tembisa. Firstly, I'd like to welcome you guys to the Hangout, which was established in 2020. It employs about 86, 87 employees. And that ranges between our kitchen staff, our barmen, our waiters, local DJs that are permanently here, who are consistently making sure that our establishment is a very well known and very vibey establishment. We have a marketing department that employs young people from Tembisa who have shown interest in that sphere inside the entertainment space. We pride ourselves in employing a lot of young people, especially from around our township, because we understand that for us to be able to build the local economy, we need to plow back and give back to the people that will have a sense of ownership of our brand as the Hangout. How that will help us is that we know that we have people that are emotionally and not just physically invested into our brand, but people who will live and be proud to be associated with a brand that they see grow in front of their eyes, I feel is my vision for the township economy. As entrepreneurs, we are building brands that we feel as the people in the communities, people should be attached to these brands, like I said in the beginning, emotionally, and they feel a sense of ownership of their brands. We're not sitting back and asking for handouts. We're not sitting back asking for tenders. We are saying we've got offerings that are purely from the townships, which we are seeing, which we are living, that we can export to the world, and we need those opportunities for us to be involved in the building of the economy, in the economy of the township, because when we take ideas from young people who are from the communities that we are living around, it's inevitable that when one of us succeeds and one of us pushes the boundaries and they have some sort of success, it is bound for us to also, one, inspire the ones that are coming after us, and two, have a chain of people that come after us that will follow up in our footsteps and say, because Shimza Wakokone Mutembisa did it, then it means I can do it. I don't have to wake up and go and look for a job wherever. I can start my own thing, which will end up impacting the people in my community. Ke kgona ho hire motho o dulang ko next door ko hae that is struggling with a job. The township economy for me goes beyond us just being a distribution channel of anything. I heard Polo saying in the beginning of her introductory that this is one of the things that was raised by a lot of young people to say, yes, we are happy to have malls being developed and shopping centers being developed in our communities, but for us right now, the mentality is that shopping center is not a shopping center if it doesn't have a Pick and Pay or a Woolworths or a Tashes, you know. We need to get to a point where more centers means what type of brands can or finding, and people were you know, had an opportunity to inspiring other people to have faith and believe in the brands that they think they can they can start, you know, and is a life grand cafe, you know, and it's because we are not sitting here feeling sorry for ourselves. We are trying to better ourselves and give people an offering that they would ordinarily want to go outside of our townships to go and experience, you know. We want you people to come to Tembisa and experience the same safety that you feel when you are in town. We want you to come and experience the same level of service and food that you would get when you are going abroad, like not abroad, to like our malls, like Mall of Africa, you know. Investing in the township economy means investing in the infrastructure in the township, you know. For us, this was just a building, Yamaspala, you know, that was not being used. You know, one of our elders who was a business guy bought this building in front, which was obviously attached to the municipal building behind us. And this shows you that with infrastructure, there's a lot that we can achieve as young people in Temisa, because things are around us at our disposal, and it's easy for us to go out and go for opportunities if we do have the infrastructure. You know, it's very important for us as people who want to invest into the township economy to make sure that our things that we are using, our infrastructure, our telecoms infrastructure, like Wi-Fi and stuff, are at a level at which people can operate at, you know. And that's a conversation that we should have with our local municipalities to say, how do you help us with the infrastructure? Like I'm saying, I don't want to feel like I'm complaining, but we have a building right behind our shop that is owned by the municipality, which we are saying to the municipality, the building is eating itself. Give us the opportunity as young people in the township that are already doing stuff. Give us that building so that we can expand our businesses, to employ young people, to bring back the economy into the same people that we want to empower, you know. In essence, the township economy is about infrastructure investment and human capital investment. We have a unique opportunity to reverse how things were done and how we as people who are colonized, how things were done when I don't even think I was even born, you know, when we were still in apartheid, when people had to wake up at 4 a.m., go to work outside of the economy, and come back home at 8 p.m. just to come and sleep, just to come back and sleep, you know. We need to create an economy that makes sure that people can live, can play, and have fun in around where they are living, and that's how we are going to retain the township economy into one space. With all that said, man, lastly, but perhaps most importantly, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank everyone for considering the hangout. You know, it just shows us that we have an offering that people are noticing out there, and we're hoping that you can come back more and more into the communities to make sure that you at least boost our confidence towards making sure that our offering is of the best quality, you know. That's about it, man. I had notes that I wrote down, but I sort of went off script. And thank you very much for inviting me to
So
speak.
I'm not sure if it's this or just the connectivity. Yeah, because I'm just saying for the chat guys, if it's something they
Thank you
can-
very much, DJ Shimza. You actually did very well. I thought that you're just gonna sing to us or play some music and then you'll be done. So you spoke like a true and very inspiring entrepreneur, I must say. So thank you very much for that. And I must repeat some of the things you said because they are so important. You know that the power of having role models can never be underestimated. And I like the fact that you spoke about if I, as Chimza, Azango Koning, can do it, I can actually inspire 100 other people Bazango Koning Libona who can do it. So I think we should be very deliberate about that. I think it's very important that the voice of success starts looking like us and starts sounding like us. And I think you also make a very important point, Chimza, about, and this is something that came out last week as well, the importance of investing in human capital in the townships. We don't have to leave Tembisa to go and get the best skills, in my opinion. There should be centers in Tembisa. Government has been talking about the 4IR for some time now. I'm yet to hear of a digital skills academy being launched in any of the townships. Maybe they have been, I've just not heard it. And if we are serious about the adoption of 4IR and taking advantage of the opportunities it presents us in solving some of our socioeconomic challenges, these are some of the practical things that, in my opinion at least, we need to see government starting to do. I don't want to take too much of your time. So before I introduce our next speaker, I thought firstly to welcome all our guests who have been walking in. As I have been talking, I have noted MEC Dau, thank you Dade for joining us. For those that I have not seen, I will acknowledge you as I see you as the day progresses. Unfortunately, the way people are seated, it's very difficult to see who's here and who's not. But also welcoming some of our guests who are in and from around Tembisa. So today's program, as I indicated earlier, is really talking to the regulators and how they are going to help us to unlock some of the constraints so that we can achieve our potential as an economy, as township economies. Our keynote address will be offered by Ndade Badi Luhutla, whom we all know as our former statistician general, but is off to other things now, causing all manner of trouble elsewhere. We're very happy that he agreed to join us today. And we will be having a panel led by Ms. Dinao Lerutla, who's the managing director of a firm called Maya Capital that focuses on investing in infrastructure. Very exciting work that they do. And very passionate, I must say, about how we can use infrastructure to really address some of the socioeconomic challenges we continue to face as a country. And on her panel, we'll have Ndade Luhutla again, Ndade Pakstau, MEC Pakstau. We'll have Duma Gubule, I hope he's here now. We will have Linda Makumani, who's the DG at the Department of Small Business. And we'll have James Hodge, who's from the Competition Commission, because there are a lot of issues actually that came out last week about the role of the Competition Commission in either halting progress or actually enabling progress. And then the second panel will be led by Mr. Octavius Pokuje. I hope he's here. He's the Managing Director of IDF Value Added Services that specializes in the ESD solutioning space. And on his panel, we will have Mr. Justice Mukulu Makwa, or Makulu Makwa rather, who's the district mayor of the Ngaka Modiri Mulema district in the Northwest Province. Sir, if you are here, I haven't seen you yet. You're welcome. We'll have Councillor Tapelo Ahmad, who's a former MMC for economic planning and development at the city of Johannesburg. We'll also have Councillor Xolani Mdegazi, who's the Ward Councillor, Ward 14 Councillor. So if you are here, you're also most welcome. And then we'll have Tulani Nchunche, who's the co-founder and CEO of Five Star Fire. And then we'll also have, I forgot, Ndade Tolo Mahaula, I hope he's here as well, who's the president of the South African Institute of Black Property Practitioners. And then Dr. Ntabise Moliko, who is a development economist at the Stellenbosch University, or rather Stellenbosch Business School. So it's quite a heavy panel of intellectuals, but also people that are on the ground, and we welcome all of them. And at this point, I would like to welcome, or rather ask Ndade Luhutla, who is joining us virtually, to provide us with his keynote address. I did introduce him earlier as our former statistician general, but he's much more than that. And I think in his speech, it will become clearer what else it is that occupies his mind. Thank you and welcome, Dr. Luhul.
Thank you very much, Polo. You are abusing pensioners. Around Saturdays like this, we are still asleep. I'll be walking around to look at my chickens. There are only 50 of them that I look after. And that's the trouble that Polo says I cause. But thank you very much for inviting me to this very important...
Just hold on, sir. Just please hold. Just please hold. Get the sound in the venue. 5 minutes.
It looks like there is a connection problem. Why don't you do this? I can talk on the phone, and then you put your phone on the speaker, and then I talk from there. Yes, then we just bypass all these other things. Yeah. Okay. For the next panel, yes, even on the next panel, we could project on we could try and do something, but let me talk on my phone. Yes, yeah. All right. Yes. Oh, I see. Okay. All right. No, look. Yeah, thank you. All right.
Please go ahead, sir.
Okay, no, thank you. Thank you very much. I don't know whether my picture is also good, but if it is disruptive, then I don't think you want to see this ugly beard and ugly head. But no, thank you very much for inviting me. Police are abusing me and using family relations to drag me out of retirement, which I am enjoying very much. But she really is doing a very good work. Let me frame my keynote address in the following way. And let me thank Shimza for really inspiring me and probably making me talk off script because he was quite fantastic away from his notes and talking off script. I want to introduce a term which might not be very useful, but very important, which is about cultural economic geography. And why this definition and framing is crucial is because when we talked about geography or space, it was as though space was there by itself. That defined your Kimberley, that defined your Johannesburg, that defined Orkney, that defined Welcome, that defined all those, as though they were there by themselves, that they were God-given centers because they were materials that had to be mined out of them. But apartheid then used cultural economic geography right at the beginning. And these terms, cultural economic geography, are new terms, but apartheid understood this very well. Because in terms of economic and cultural, they defined societies by culture, by race, and so on, and located them where they were, and pretended that that's how the order has to be. And they made that, instrumentalized that to define how ourselves will be. The danger of that now is that that cultural economic geography raised its ugly head where there are blacks, where there are Indians, and when the looting and the shooting happens, it identifies these cultural groupings as they are. But by cultural economic geography, one doesn't want to talk about race-based politics, but rather integration of cultures and actively participating in different actions. And cultural economic geography talks about the emergent economies. And these are driven largely, and they are given expression by the Zoomerization. When I say Zoomerization, I mean Zoom, like I can talk to you from here, as well as the Uber economy. In fact, what you are seeing now is the basic advantage that places like Tembisa, like Soweto, now have, in that with the Zoomerization and Uberization of our economies through this technology, you no longer need to be in a specific space to actually survive economically. The Santons of this world, the New Yorks of this world, people work from home. In fact, what you see in the United Arab Emirates, they already are taking advantage of this and saying you can commute from the UEA, United Arab Emirates. You can telecommute to anywhere in the world for as long as you are resident in the UAE. And that's their mantra. That's how they want to have people located there. So space and making those spaces comfortable and livable. Then you can commute from there to anywhere, which then gives the economies of Soweto and Tembisa the added advantage of size, that a residence becomes the main issue around how you drive economies, because you no longer need to be in an office in Sandton. You can be where I am here at home and run an economy. So instead of the 7 or 8 economic activities such as agriculture, mining, industrial classification, manufacturing, communities, waters and electricity, retail and so on, all these things no longer determine where you should be. You can be where you are and make a living. So residence seems to be the core driver in the future of economies because of the Zoomerization and Uberization of our economies. Having framed this cultural economic geography as the basis for the future, then I want to step back and go into history and probably say, what are the lessons that we have to draw from that history that we have had in South Africa? And what economic activity have we been engaged in particular being predominant in that? Now, I would like to pick on 3 areas. Taxi industry as represented by SAPTA, South African Black Taxi Association. Soccer as represented largely importantly by Kaizer Chiefs and Jomo Sono, because those are the people I see as having integrated and actually having managed the value chains from being soccer players to owners of soccer. There are certain value chains that they didn't manage, but I think they illustrate in many ways what the township economy was all about. And then, of course, retail by way of small businesses. And I'll go through this in short order, just to illustrate the point that there is a lot to learn. I'll not talk about Stockwells because they cut across all that. But if we were to talk about soccer, for instance, Kaizer Motaung revolutionized. He was an entrepreneur. He's an entrepreneur par excellence. He revolutionized soccer in South Africa. And he brought peace to soccer. In the 70s, soccer was very rough and violent. And if you belonged to one, you wouldn't actually entertain the other. There were no-go zones. But these days, when we go to matches, people go in the same taxi supporting different soccer clubs. And these are the spaces where our societies are being normalized. Very, very much normalized. In my home here, I have one supporting Chiefs, the other one, of course, supporting the big team, Sundowns. And we argue at home about this, and of course, we may at times not eat while others are eating because the outcome of the games have been different. But soccer itself has normalized society. In the 60s and 70s, they would gwaza you. The violence that we saw at the stadium but also the peace that we saw at the tragic events of the game between Chiefs and Pirates, where people were stampeded. was a call for us to think as human beings. So we have these key points that are crucial for our societies, which is normalizing society. And that normalization of society through sports is very important. We have entrepreneurs in the people like Kaiser Mutaung, who actually introduced a soccer club and made it the biggest brand that you can ever think about, not only in South Africa, but globally on the continent. Kaiser Chiefs is the big brand, but it arose out of Soweto, grown and projected in Soweto. Jomo Sono, breaking away from pirates, started Jomo Cosmos and had a particular entry into that market where he was producing those who would be promoted to different areas, and also in the process taught these people economics and said, this is how you must invest in China. These are indigenous, and they beat apartheid to it. They existed at the time of apartheid and grew, and I don't see them being featured anywhere in our trial and attempt of understanding what does it mean to be a Black entrepreneur. And these are people in front of us, and they've multiplied themselves across. So if you think about agglomerations of ideas, these are the people who propagate ideas and mobilize us in different ways. What they might have not managed so far, which they should, is what jersey has to be produced by who and where. They must control it's one thing to have a Nike, but I don't see why there is no Nike that is Chiefs or in that sportswear. That's something that has to be dealt with, because we have what it takes, and we have had what it takes all along. So these soccer legends are crucial for us to understand how they performed in a complex economy. Let's talk to retail. Retail, I happen to have 4 employees in my office in Bophuthatswana. And all those 4 joined me when I headed the SA. But there's a very deep history that is there. I mean, if you think about Ndade Ronald Ditsebe, he was a master of golf, but also a master in business. He was the first person to introduce dairy business in Soweto. But with the uprisings of 1976, which was an uprising for equality, an uprising for education, an uprising for a better South Africa, it yielded also negative consequences that we are not addressing at this point in time, and that we are not arresting. Ronald Ditsebe had to move to Mabatu, where he didn't have a business, he didn't have all these ideas. He then worked in the office of Bophuthatswana. His business was destroyed at the time of the uprisings. I'm not saying the uprisings were wrong, they were correct. But we needed to capitalize on the uprisings and see how we master Black economic empowerment as part and parcel of that uprising. But that business was destroyed forever. Mtale Pirwa, the Pirwas in Deep Kloof, were there. Hlabi Morudu, a son of a businessman. And all these people, we attended university together in Lesotho. You can be sure that, like Indians who would be behind the counter running their own business, their children were pushed into aspiring not to be business people in Soweto, but to acquire knowledge so that they can make their businesses better. But the Soweto uprisings broke that capital and infrastructure that existed in Soweto. The issue is to rebuild that, because we have been there before. And our politics at the moment at the parks is so bad that it is destroying that. And in that economic space, and in that cultural economic space, because Soweto was a cultural economic space by definition, as is Tembisa, as our friend Shimza has so elaborately cut across all those theories of geography, economy, and culture. And that's a cultural economic space, which now is the future of our business, because it integrates all those things and questions, not accept why things are the way they are. It doesn't rest, the theory doesn't rest on things are the way they are because there's Kimberley, there's Johannesburg, but it asks the question, why are they the way they are and how can we improve on them? That's what cultural economic geography triggers into ourselves and in building this. And I'm making these examples to illustrate the essence of this cultural economic geography, where we are, because of the Zoomerization and the Uberization of the economy, puts Black economists in polar position because of the advantage that they can take of this emergent cultural economic geography. Now, I want to go to transport, SAPTA. If you think about SAPTA, these SAPTA people actually questioned the issue of why should we accept Kimberley as Kimberley or Johannesburg as Johannesburg, where you grow, you drill gold. Why don't we engage in the transportation networks of this? And SAPTA was a formidable force that weakened apartheid, killed the Spoornet, killed the rail where you would have to go into Huberu, and then as these Boers were moving milk from farm to farm, you were part of the passenger. The collateral damage to moving milk from one point to the other as you were traveling between Lesotho and here, or from wherever you came in the Transkei and so on to come to the mines. SAPTA reduced that trip by train that would take you 2 days from Bloemfontein to Johannesburg to about 3 hours. And the convenience of travel undermined the rail infrastructure and became very, very efficient in the way it was run. But SAPTA, yes, it was Black Taxi Association. It had a muscle, buying power and everything, but it didn't control the banks. It didn't control the transformation of transport into Gautrain or the rail infrastructure and so on. It was excluded. And then, of course, SAPTA in its representative form transformed into the flight, what was it called? That didn't take off. But what the aspiration to own airlines showed was SAPTA understood, in whatever representative form in regions and so on, understood cultural economic geography and transformation, but they have been undermined by our politics, that they didn't become part and parcel of the economic muscle that controls and manages the value chains, which in many ways also soccer didn't manage to get into. And it's because we haven't positioned ourselves such that we can take advantage and benefit those who have been at the forefront of the struggle. So SAPTA was at the forefront of the economic struggle and economic emancipation. But the absence of theory around how we organize ourselves in those and the divisions that have been there at the trough caused by people coming to the trough and fighting over money has undermined even the areas which were dominated and prospectively had to be dominated by Black people. Now, what has happened? What is happening now, I mean, the taxi industry transports 10 million people in South Africa daily and has the convenience of dropping them at the door. Of course, without subsidies. And government says it will not give subsidies to people who don't pay tax, and they say we will not pay tax because you don't get subsidies, and to subsidize the rail or subsidize the buses and so on, instead of rethinking ourselves as to who should be those who manage the value chains of transport. And those are the people in the townships and so on, and they understand better the networks that go in there. How do you then make that culture work favorably so that the taxi industries, when the guys who run taxis, he say they almost are like children of the same mother in the way they behave, the taxi industry. So I would argue that if we think about township economy, we actually have to go deeper into what is the theory around cultural economic geography and understand its transformation, and then understand agglomerations and the theory of agglomerations and how they behave, particularly at the cusp of winning the war against monopoly capital, which the Black industry, the Black economy, and the township industry has to fight, not only to survive, but to make South Africa work. Now, where is the problem at the moment? The problem that we have is those businesses of Ndaderi, Ronald, Piruas, and Murudus that worked with me and attended university with me when we were in Lesotho, and came to work with me here and work with me. I've been observing and trying to understand what the transformations have been and what needs to be done. Those businesses, wherever they are, probably are now taken over by foreign people. And the city center of Johannesburg is also taken over by foreign people. I'm not having anything against foreign people, but when the policies are such that they allow foreign people to occupy the mainstay of the economy, then you are really firing the wrong things in society. There'll never be peace. Maitri of Malaysia said, when he got into power, he said, for every business that is Chinese, I need a Malay to be having as many as the Chinese, but even better going forward, even more going forward for the Malay. Now, with all the kinds of grants and all these other things that are happening, the money for grants, no sooner has it been provided, does it go into making these businesses very prosperous. Can you imagine if those businesses of Dateroni, of Murudu and Pirwa were at the point, running at this point in time, and with grants and everything, those businesses would do better and much better. And they would have sent many more children to university to study, to aspire well beyond running a shop in Deep Kloof or wherever it is. Surely, the likes of Shimza are the new Ditsebes and the new Piruas and the new Murudus. But they are confronting a situation that is not guided by theory and where government is actually hampering them from doing what they can actually do to make the township economy, even when the cultural economic geography pushed by Zoomerization as well as Uberization can work in their favor. They are likely to lose that wave and miss it if we don't act swiftly. Finally, I would like to say the following, that we need actually to take advantage and deepen the ownership channels in transport, because those are very, very important and they are organic and they have been developing that way. Organic unity of this is there in the Black community. We need to ensure that the value chains are deepened and are controlled. And then we don't exclude the taxi owners when we develop things like Gautrain, as well as Santago or airlines. These people must be in that space. So is the Ditsebes, the Piruas, and the Murudus when we go into retail trade. And the new Mafikizolo, Shimza, must be in that space of retail. But we have to understand the opportunities that are created by the Zoomerization and the Uberization, and the locational attributes of residents that enable them to be the new wave of entrepreneurs and owners of capital in the context of locational attributes of retail and that are being undermined by the Uberization and Zoomerization of information technology. The wave for township economy is now, and the stars are aligned. I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ndadele Hotla, for your very thought-provoking comments, and actually for firstly reminding us actually that Black excellence in business has been there before, and it continues to be there, and we don't seem to be spending enough time celebrating that which has worked and trying to do more and more of it. I would like to Miss Dinao Lerutla, and I would also like to invite MEC Tau to join her on stage. I would like to invite Duma Kubule as well to join Dinao on stage. And then Ndadele Hotla will remain with us virtually. So thank you very much, Ndadele Hotla, for agreeing to remain with us. I hope I haven't forgotten anyone.
Small business.
Joining us. We are also being joined virtually by the Director General of the Department of Small Business and Mr. Hodge, the Chief Economist at the Competition Commission. They'll be joining us virtually. Sorry, my apologies for not announcing that.
I'm too short. I'll probably Is this one? Can you hear me? Okay. I thought I would sit down, but it looks like I'm too short. And the podium is going to swallow me, so I'll have to do this from here. President, for the opportunity to be part of this conversation. I'd wish to see the people that we have joining us virtually on the panel, if possible. Thank you. Good morning, MEC. Good morning, Dr. Kobule. Madam President, I think the question that you're really asking us to reflect on are the three key issues that are the enemy of our economy as South Africa. And it also happens that it affects the Black population in the main, which is unemployment, inequality, and poverty. And it sounds to me like if we start addressing unemployment, the other two start improving by themselves. We're talking about the majority of our population living on incomes of not more than 1,200 a month. And others living on 18 rands a day. So when we talk about the township economy, I think let's just remember that we have households and livelihoods behind it. The terminology can really get quite complex sometimes, but what we're really talking about is how to generate household income so that our people can live. That's really what this is about. So I'm going to get right into it, and I'm going to hope that I do justice to trying to come up with solutions of how we're going to move forward. Is our DG for the National Small Business Department online? Good morning, and I'd like to various articles. By the way, we're in the township, so please don't mind me if I keep looking sideways. We are in the real economy. So, DG, I wanted to start with you and say, there's an article that says, in South Africa, we only have 10% of our people self-employed. And compared to other countries where employment rates are far better, that number is about 30%. And the biggest barrier to it is just how easy it is to register a business to comply. The voice. Okay. So just how easy is it to comply so that businesses can be legitimate and they can operate in our country? And I'd like us to take you through how the department is helping to enable how we simplify the bureaucracy of registering businesses and operating. Remembering that right now we have various of the crisis that we've been facing. Township economies, I mean, our township enterprises are actually not able to access those grants and the various benefits that they could. So maybe if you could just start by painting the picture for us of how the small business department works on enabling, in particular, the micro and the less formal businesses that we find in the over to you. Sorry, apologies for the glitches with the technology. I hope it will get smoother over time.
Yes, good morning, Program Director. Good morning, MEC Dr. Parile Khutla, and panelists as well as attendees. Thank you for this opportunity. I hope I'm audible. I'll try and be very brief in my response and be straight to the point. You know what happened last year, I think it was a very good lesson for all of us. The pandemic, when it hit, it forced us to think differently. We were forced to move with speed. We were forced to come up with interventions that will allow, especially businesses that are based in the townships, to move with speed in terms of accessing support, especially from government. Technologically, what we did, we established what we call an SMME SA database, which assists businesses firstly to register, because I'm sure Dr. Pali will know that in the country, we don't have a database of small businesses. We don't know how many businesses exist in the country. We use Stats SA estimates. So we established the SMMESA.gov.za. We have over 230,000 SMEs who are registered now, and they continue to register every day. So through that platform, we also enabled SMMEs to register. One of the challenges that we faced last year when there was lockdown, most of the SMMEs could not pay their employees because they were not operating. So what we did, we thought we should link our SMME SA database with the registration of UIF. So SMEs can now register in the database and also proceed and register with UIF, as well as other government organization, including SARS. But what we also did was to also link this with CIPC, so that you can also, you don't have to register just the name of the company, but you can also register with CIPC on the same platform. You don't have to go out and go and look for the office of CIPC to register your business. But also we do have our offices of our entities, which is Small Enterprise Development Agency, as well as Small Enterprise Finance Agency. They are able to assist. They just sit down with you. You are able to know that the turnaround times have improved drastically. You are able to register a business as soon as possible. Most importantly, we also came up with what we call Township and Rural Entrepreneurship Program, where we thought, because in the past, what we used to come up with one instrument and assume that all businesses will be able to access that kind of support. We came up with a Township and Rural Entrepreneurship Program, which has subsectors. So someone who is doing let's say you are in personal care business, you are able to get support that is dedicated towards personal care support. You also have instruments that deal with automotives. We have people who are dealing with clothing and textile. So all these various subsectors within the township do get dedicated support, customized support, just to make sure that they are able to run their business efficiently. So we provide both financial as well as non-financial support, because we know that most of the time for you to run a business, you need to comply with certain regulations. So we make it easier that CEDA, they are able to take you through that process. You don't have to struggle on your own as a business to go around looking for places where to register and all those other things. So there are those kinds of instruments that we've made available to assist, especially enterprises that are based in the township. I must emphasize, Chair, Program Director, that we don't take township and rural enterprises as informal businesses. There is a dedicated scheme for informal businesses because they also have their own challenges. So they do have their own scheme, but we take these township and rural enterprises as enterprises that in the future are going to be growing, assisting us to create jobs in the townships. Thank you.
Thank you very much, DG, for those insights. We're going to come back to that. And I think when we come back to it, I'd like you to reflect on some of the insights that Ntatele Hotla shared with us. For example, to say some of the entrepreneurs actually create a multiplier effect of enabling other entrepreneurs to establish, and the extent to which entrepreneurs like DJ Shimza, who's already got a location that is probably well-resourced, can be, some of the areas that you start getting closer to, so that the benefits that are trying to get into the township economy are actually in the economy. And I don't know to what extent our entrepreneurs have experienced, challenges with reaching your call center people, because since we're now working digital, and it seems like it's going to be the case for quite a while, the ability to deliver the services becomes even more important. So give that some thought, and we'll come back to it as part of the solutions in terms of how you can help drive access to your services to come even closer into our townships. Thank you. Babu Kubuli, I'll come to the MEC. We're not talking policy. He's got active programs that he's going to give us examples of. But I want to come to you first, because when we talk to the MEC, we're not talking at a local level. One of the things that you mentioned in some of your previous addresses is that one of the big losses in the townships is that we no longer have the industrial skills. We no longer have the industrial skills that we used to have in the townships, which were coming out of what we call technical colleges. I don't even want to use the word TVET. It feels like it was another generation of colleges. But back then you had learners who, while in high school, could decide to go into the industrial space, and they would then end up becoming welders, plumbers, and so on. Now, in the middle of COVID, in that economic crisis, what we actually experienced was that home improvements went up. So stores that sell home improvement wares have actually experienced a surge in their sales in the midst of an economic crisis. But it seems like our townships have missed on it, because we no longer have those welders and those plumbers. And I'm not sure where we get them, but what would you say a township economy should look like outside the shopping malls? Because we do have these economies, these pockets of economies.
Hello. Thanks a lot. In the work that I've been doing, how we can increase the growth of our economy and stimulate local economies. So I've been a big campaigner for the basic income grant. And I believe that a basic income grant has done the costing. There's many people who've done the costing. It can be one of the major things to stimulate township economies, because people spend the money and something comes back to the government and other taxes. So I've been doing a lot of work with that, and because many people here. And then the second thing I've been looking at is the whole issue of universal social security. And we have to expand so we have to increase the size of the child support grant towards the poverty line, and then we open grants. So we have existing grants, how can I put it? They must be universal and they must extend, because currently you have a means test. And then the third thing, I'm just going slowly, quickly, is universal public services. We really have to address this issue of education and health. Now, I've been doing some work on the whole issue about fees must fall, the target of 2.5 million enrollments in TVET colleges, and we've currently got about 700,000. So the issue in the TVET sector is that it's underfunded, it's grossly underfunded, and having the free tertiary education hasn't improved access to TVET colleges, and the same with universities. So one of the biggest problems we have is this youth unemployment story. 75% youth unemployment, and I just think we cannot accept that going forward. So many of the people in that age cohort, 18 to 24, must be in higher education. And what I would like to say is that the higher education participation rate for Africans is 19%. In countries like South Korea, it's 95, 96% in Chile. So that is what we should be doing. We should be expanding what we call, let's call them TVET colleges. The quality of, nobody respects the output of these TVET colleges. So we also have to, the lecturers aren't qualified. We have to increase, so we have to make massive investments in terms of our education system. The successful countries in Asia, they upgraded the whole population. If you look at South Korea, it was where Ethiopia was when it started, and look at where they are now. 70% of people in South Korea have got qualifications. And in South Africa, the figure is 5%, So what I'm trying to say is that we have, in a previous life, I used to live in Poland, and every town you go to there has got a university, has got a college, a film school, a shipping school, everything. And I would meet the the mayor, and ask, what is the population of your city? And he says, depends if the students are here. If the students are here in one city, he says it's 800,000. If the students are not here, it's 400,000. So I just believe I've been doing a lot of work in terms of this expanding access to education, which we must, our targets in the white paper is 27% participation in higher education. And if the target in what's this thing called in the National Development Plan is about 25%. So I'm thinking those things are too low. We need to have what they call a mass system of higher education. A mass system of higher education has got more than 50% participation by young people in higher education. So those are the types of things I think really expand. And then just also the last one is that expanded public works. Our budget towards it is too small. So many people and young people could be employed in terms of doing projects in the townships, so it is way too small, and we have to increase the size. And then finally, of the issue of industrial development, which we may talk about later. And then finally, Janelle, because this is an ABSIP thing, the access to finance for black SMMEs, sorry, is a big problem. Every year I do an analysis of what the bank and what the public sector is doing. So the bank's latest report shows the total exposure of the bank in terms of the black SME, in terms of financial sector structure, is 21 billion rands for the whole country. The figure is down from 8 billion. This is about 0.4% of industry assets. So it's serious about expanding SME. We have to set quotas for bank lending towards SMEs, And then the issue of the public sector involvement of funding for SMEs is way too little. The National Empowerment Fund hasn't been capitalized since 2010. It lends about 300 million a year. And then the same thing with the other one, what's it called, the CIFA, it's 1 billion a year. I didn't see the figures for Gauteng Propeller, but the total, our financial sector, what they do towards small, totally inadequate. I'm talking about public and private. So those are some of the things we should be talking about here. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. And MEC, that leads me to have some of your insights being shared with our ABSIP members who are joining us today, flowing quite well. We have a bloated country. We have if we were to put our unemployment on the freeways, we've got a real congestion. We need off-ramps. And it looks like some of those off-ramps that can help us to free up the congestion could be even entrepreneurial solutions to addressing the education problems. Our president earlier spoke about a Digital Skills Academy, for example, as one of the solutions. Not all the solutions have to come from government, but I believe that Gauteng City Region has a vision for how our townships need to be reimagined, rebuilt. And maybe if you could just share with us how, as Gauteng City Region, you are responding to the township economy, taking into account the challenges that are being posed about access, reach, finance, the bloatedness of it, and just share with us tangible solutions that are being offered to the township entrepreneurs at the moment, and how we can help improve those. Well, thank you very much. Not sure. Are you unmuted?
Is this better? Okay. You want the mask off? Now I'm a public representative. Taking the mask off is also illegal. Well, thank you very much. Firstly, to say that we have to address the policy and regulation environment. Part of our reality is that we have, in addressing township economic development in particular, have not historically addressed the limitations of the historic policy and regulation environment. So part of the decision the provincial government has taken is to create a legislative framework that enables township economic development. And that legislative framework does a number of things, so it's intended to do a number of things. The first is to compel both government and industry that participate in the township economy to facilitate enterprise and supplier development in the township. It compels procurement from township-based enterprises. It reduces the regulatory burden of compliance for township enterprises. And it compels all of us to support, through incubation and business development support, township-based enterprises. Of course, it also creates an enabling environment and a draft set of bylaws for municipalities to govern the way in which township economic development happens and matters related to land use and development management in the township. We've presented this draft law to the legislature in Gauteng for adoption so that we can have an appropriate enabling policy and regulatory environment for township economic development. The second is about the reality that Duma was raising, which is the extent to which there is access to finance for township-based enterprises. And we all understand all too well that, in fact, the resources within government from a financing of enterprises point of view is limited. And there are a number of things that we need to do. The first is use our resources to gear and leverage private sector investment. So part of what we have resolved and provincial government allocated as 250 million is to create a wholesale fund, which wholesale fund we are capitalizing together with the ITC so that we can transfer these resources into intermediaries who are bringing in their own capital. So instead of the GP, whose budget is actually not even 200 million, let alone what we disperse, it's actually not 200 million. So instead of going down that direction, we're saying we've been given seed capital to build a different set of instruments and institutions. And part of what the suite of products that we've designed and we're currently taking through the processes of approval from various partners that have come to the party in terms of financing enterprises is how do we address the property sector in the township. And I always say to people, I come from the township. And typically in the township, almost every household is involved in real estate. Because in reality, people are renting out back rooms, two-room and garage. We had at home two-room and garage. We had tenants who live in the two-room and garage. Or it's shacks, or you're renting out space for somebody to run a spaza shop or retail of some sort. So this is real estate. The question is, how do we ensure that we enhance the real estate development in the township and we reduce the burden of qualification to participate? Now, historically, we're in a situation where people would take the risk of building the two-room and garage and bond it against their house. And many people lost their homes in the process. So we said, okay, now how do we redesign this? And one of the partners that we engaged with is looking at not using the house as collateral, but use the enterprise that is the real estate as the basis of extending the loan to. So those are part of the products that we design. We're designing products with regards to the taxi economy. Now, the taxi economy is beyond the vehicle itself, the driver and the rank. It is the reality that, in fact, taxis take us to destinations. And you have to look at it from an origination and destination point of view and say, what happens at the point of origination, which is the major rank that is there? How do you create commercial opportunities around the taxi economy? We've reached out to Toyota and have reached an in-principle agreement with Toyota that, in fact, because we are the suppliers of the bulk of what constitutes taxis in the townships, we need you to help us create enterprises around your vehicles, around the maintenance of those vehicles, around components of those vehicles in the townships, so that you have real practical participation by people in townships. The last point I want to make, and the theme came across earlier about building brands. Part of the reality is that townships are at the end of almost every value chain. This is where retail happens. So even when you come here, the reality is that we're at the end of the value chain. How do we ensure that we participate in the rest of the value chain? How do we ensure manufacturing in the townships? And the recent riots have been an important lesson to the extent that people have not bought into the idea that these installations are part of the township. Because in reality, who transports the goods into the mall? So the logistics value chain that has not enabled township-based enterprises to participate in the logistics, warehousing, transportation of goods into the townships. Who manufactures some of these goods? Who said that personal care products that are sold at the local Clicks or Checkers or Woolworths in the mall should come from outside? So we've reached out to those who are the major companies that anchor these malls in the townships and said, well, let us have a conversation and build an action lab around creating access to market for township-based enterprises so that we can industrialize our townships and ensure that through this industrialization, people have access to market and that you provide business development support and enterprise development support to these enterprises. And we said to them, instead of all of us running all over the show with little ESG programs here and there, let us consolidate our efforts, let us aggregate our efforts, and let us ensure that we build these enterprises from inside the township. So we're establishing the action lab, we're bringing all the parties to the table. Ultimately, we need to ensure that township-based enterprises are not just the retailers, they must also be the manufacturers. They must also be the transporters of goods. And those are the sort of programs that we're currently working on and in the process of rolling out in the province of Gauteng.
Great. Thank you very much, MEC, for those insights. You know, outside the established brands, what I've picked up to be quite interesting is that there are a lot of new brands that are coming up, which a lot of our society is taking interest in and supporting them, and they're growing to become quite renowned brands. So maybe we also need to look outside the existing brands, but into the new ones. There are a lot of furniture manufacturers in the townships that are supplying a lot of new families and people that are improving their households there without necessarily being in the stores. And I think if we can still reach them, we would be getting somewhere. So one of the things that I'd like you to think about, because we don't have a lot of time, as you share your insights and probably towards a conclusion, is to say, ABSIP members in the main, some of them work very hard to mobilize funds from the pension fund industry, which can then help to augment that SME finance that you mentioned, Tape Kobule, that's coming from the banks and from government. I haven't heard you mention them yet. And I'd like you to think about whether there isn't something that can be done with that association of participants that are trying to mobilize other funds and see if there can be solutions that can be looked at together. It sounds like government is working on their own, private sector is working on their own. Everybody has ideas, but they're not yet coming together. And there's probably other solutions there that can be more immediate as well, that can help to, start relieving the humanitarian crisis that we have, because we need tangible solutions today. So please think about that. I'd like to then address my next question to James from the Competition Commission. Good morning, sir. One of the successes of the Competition Commission is that in the transactions that were done, especially with the multinationals in the retail sector, there were these funds that would then be set aside to help small businesses. I'd like you to take us through your experiences of how they've worked, if you've been close to monitoring them, what else can be improved so that those benefits actually come to Tembisa, and how we can also work with our local FMCG market overall to open a lot more of those pockets, but also deliberately looking at them coming to the townships and not just small business in general, because we know that there's a big divide between small businesses and what's actually happening in our townships. Over to you.
Thanks very much, Danae, and thank you for the opportunity to be part of this forum. I mean, I think to answer your question, I'm just going to pick up what the MEC sort of left off as one of the last points about the end of the value chain. And I think what we found at the Commission is that, in fact, it's exactly the problem of integrating into the value chain. And these value chains are quite exclusive of small businesses, also emerging businesses and township businesses. So typically, we finished a retail inquiry recently. When a mall is set up in a township, there'll be an exclusive lease in favor of a national retailer. That national retailer will work with big distribution centers, so their supply chain is not supportive of small businesses or even local township businesses. But they also exclude other retailers from operating in that mall. And typically these developments will also require that 80% of the space is there for national brands, excluding local brands or township brands as well. So exactly the problem is I think unlocking these value chains as well as building your own parallel value chains as well. So in terms of unlocking the value chain, some of the actions we have taken is to end exclusive leases, is to address some of the differences in rebates going to different retailers, but also through merger control and other initiatives to try and build into global firms and even local FMCG a domestic supply chain. So the first of these was the Walmart transaction where about 250 million went into developing local suppliers through the Massmart brand, and the recent grocery inquiry also sought to extend that to the rest of the grocery chain. And this links as well to recent localization initiatives from government as well. But to take another example of a closed value chain is the auto value chain, and that's come up again in some of the discussions now. But we recently put out guidelines to try and open up this value chain. But historically, your motor vehicle companies would have a specific set of service stations and dealers that they would deal with. All cars had to be serviced under warranty at those dealerships. They would refuse technical know-how, refuse original equipment spare parts to independent service providers. And even your insurance companies would reinforce this by having a little panel that it was quite exclusive in terms of who would be permitted to do repair work. So again, the auto guidelines have sought to open that up by allowing consumers to go to independent service providers, by asking or requiring rather that your auto companies make available technical know-how and spare parts. So those are all the types of barriers. It's a deliberate exclusionary behavior that we need to address. But moving forward, not only removing that exclusionary behavior, but opening up this value chain through deliberate action, as you pointed out, by requiring companies to actually start to transform their value chains. I mean, maybe just to pick up lastly, we're running an online platforms inquiry now, and it was raised earlier that digital markets can transform economies. But again, we can also see that in some of those, there's a reinforcement of almost this dependency and favored value chains. So we're finding that it is Uber, it is Zoom, it's not a local startup platform. We have seen some platforms, but there seems to be barriers to getting our own digital platforms that may integrate better into our domestic economies up and running. But we're also seeing on these platforms that big brands can pay for prominent positions, fees can be discriminatory against smaller players or businesses on those platforms. And these can all hinder the participation in the online economy. So it has potential, but it can reinforce what we're seeing in the traditional economy as well. So I think working on those market elements as alongside the regulatory elements are critical if we're to open up the township economic space. Thank you.
Thank you very much, James. And then I think if I then can go to Nkatele Hotla, when you're listening to our fellow panelists just sharing their insights in terms of what can be done, there's a need for some immediate response. There's a need for planning, so that we have a coherent plan of where we're going, and we're not starting and stopping every year, or we're not just jumping onto what is immediately available. How do you believe that, you know, we can enhance our planning, our incentives, and our initiatives towards the township economy?
Yes, no, thank you very much. I think that's yes, thank you very much. Can you hear me now? Am I audible? Okay.
Yes, you can.
Yes, that's the part of the elephant in the room, and I've been talking about this issue of planning. And planning is a business in looking ahead, and not looking ahead for 2 years or 3 years. Important as 1 year, 2 years, 6 months is important. But when you think about an economy, you are thinking about 60 years, and they're working in uncertainties. And as I made the example of the families, the business is like a family, it's generational, and therefore its plan must then take into account 30-year lots. That's how it should be. And that art or science of looking into an uncertain future requires a lot of planning and a lot of data and a lot of coherence and similar vision from a government or a society. So planning is very, very essential, not only at the level of financial plan for a business, but a strategic view of how that path will be treaded so that individuals, private sector can link into those. That's our government. Do our institutions have that? They don't. Do they have the capacity? Well, I think if they had the capacity, this would have been long implemented. They don't. So I know that at the time in 2016, when there was trouble, say South Africa and so on, when I talked to some of the business people, I said, you know, we need to plan. They said, no, we can't. I mean, we can't always be planning. Rome is burning. I said that's the time when you have to sit back and think strategically and look at where Rome should go. Now, since 2016 up to now, we don't know where Rome is going. So we really need to do that. There was a study that we did on small businesses as a person with a 22 on slope. Obviously, there are too many schemes and they don't have strategic differentiation. They are looking at the same thing. Now, the question is the bureaucracy having these schemes in order for bureaucracy to employ itself? I would argue it does. In fact, when you look at the reach in terms of access, reach of things, you realize that the DTI and all these things around small businesses and so on really have very little impact. In fact, the majority of access to finance by these businesses is from family, friends, and fools, not from these institutions. And Mashonisa does even better, not even from the banks. And the issue around access to finance and support from markets and so on is very, very important. And I believe that the DG small businesses will change dramatically this. And I'll believe him when I see rationalization of those multiple institutions that are stepping on each other's toes, from national to province to district. They get replicated like the Nigerian doll, where things always come in threes: national, province, district, and so on. So we need really to think hard about planning. It requires data, it requires competence, it requires strategic visioning, it requires scenarios. If we don't have those elements, then our plans are just wishes.
Thank you, Tatelo Hotla. I think this next question, MEC, you let me know if you'd like to also take it. And I'd like to also direct it to James at the Competition Commission and the DG for Small Business. One of the questions that are coming up is to say, how do we simplify the regulation for small businesses, in particular tax compliance? So saying, how do we make sure that the benefits for the township economy go to South African entrepreneurs? Because we know that there are a lot of non-SA entrepreneurs that are also benefiting, and it seems to be something that is a bit of a tension point. There are those two questions. You'll just flag. James, would you like to give it a first step? How do we simplify regulation for our entrepreneurs? How do we get the services closer? And how do we actually support South African entrepreneurs in the townships?
Happy to have a first go. I mean, in fact, a lot of our delve into the township economy through the grocery retail market inquiry identified a lot of regulatory and infrastructure barriers, and those have been raised through this forum already. But one thing we did determine is that there's often an uneven regulatory and infrastructure treatment between large business and small, sometimes informal, but often formal township businesses as well. So when a ShopRite comes into an area, often the municipality will create infrastructure. Some of the regulations around, say, liquor laws, etc., are different, applied differently to these larger businesses. So what we heard from entrepreneurs across the country was what needs to change is that the actual economic regulation needs to facilitate business rather than restrict business. And that may mean less regulation than more. So restrictions on operating hours, may hinder, in fact, smaller spaza shops who are closed early when people are returning home late from work. Restrictions on alcohol is obviously a touchy issue, but it does impact on businesses. Zoning, limits on zoning, the speed to which zoning or rezoning is done to facilitate businesses is another factor. So that's on the regulation side, but it's the facilitative infrastructure, basic infrastructure such as lighting, security. For a lot of shops, just security is an issue in terms of cash on hand and the range of products. So these need to be addressed because you need to invest in the infrastructure for business to come. You can't wait for business to put in that infrastructure. The whole point of government should be to provide a facilitative environment. So, it was raised by Shimze at the beginning of this discussion about an empty building. How can that be used? Even when we looked into digital infrastructure and extending, important Wi-Fi services, etc., there's scope for government to facilitate businesses, to give access to municipal infrastructure, street poles, etc., to run cables and fiber in, to use municipal centers to be a broadcast center for free Wi-Fi in township economies. So it is also harnessing what is there. And as I said, sometimes removing regulations rather than adding another layer of regulations can provide that space for entrepreneurs.
Sure. DJ, would you like to take a step maybe on the one about how do we include South African entrepreneurs?
No, thanks, Program Director. I think maybe just to add a little bit on what was raised by MEC earlier. Remember, there is what is called the Businesses Act, which is 1991 legislation, which is very old. The president transferred it from the DTIC to the Department of Small Business Development last year, so that we can relook at how this act can be utilized to make life easier for small businesses, especially those that are based in township and those that are based in the CBDs. So we are reviewing that legislation because we want to standardize and simplify, this business licensing framework across the country, because different provinces are doing their own things, and for some. We've discovered that when we're introducing these township-based instruments, that some of the things that are put there, they become a hindrance. For example, one municipality will be asking for 4,500 for someone to get a permit to trade on the streets. That is a hindrance. You cannot expect someone who does not make that kind of money in a week, and some even in a month, to be able to get that license. So we are introducing this framework to make sure that there is standardization across municipalities, because some of them, they will tell you that, no, this is how we make money as a municipality, but it cannot be there to hinder the operation of small businesses, especially those that are based in the township and rural areas. That issue, it's part of the discussions that are taking place at an IMC on migration, which is led by Minister of Home Affairs as well as Minister of Labor, Employment and Labor, Minister Nxesi. Because in terms of the Immigration Act, people who can operate locally are people who can invest a minimum of 5 million. But we have people who are not investing that kind of money, but who are operating in the space. So there is a problem in terms of ensuring that we enforce the law. It's more of the issue of the enforcement, because most of the people who are, especially those who are operating in the informal and the township areas who are not local, are operating, they have not invested 5 million in the country. So it's an issue of the enforcement of the Immigration Act and making sure that we have the people who are supposed to be legitimately operating in the country operating. So there are those initiatives. In terms of what we are introducing as a department, we make it a point that the support that we provide goes to the people who are here in the country legally and who are doing the business and are also supporting local economic development. Last thing I just want to say is that we are also reviewing the National Small Enterprise Act, because most of the SMMEs, especially black-owned SMMEs, have been complaining about the abuse that they get, sometimes even from government departments. They don't pay them on time. So in the legislation, we are introducing the alternative dispute resolution mechanism, which is the small enterprise ombuds, where they can go and lay complaints with the ombuds, and then it would be dealt at, because the big guys, especially the big corporates, they don't mind taking on these small businesses through courts, because small business, they don't have enough money to defend the cases and to take the big guys on. So this instrument we believe that is going to assist us in assisting our SMEs, to deal with the abuse, especially from corporates, but also from government departments. I think we must agree that government departments, in some instances, they don't pay SMEs on time. So this legislation will really change the landscape. Thanks.
Thank you, DG. Let me see. I don't know if you'd like to also add to that, but I actually have a question for you from the floor. I don't know if our tech team has got a mic that's roving. Is there a roving mic? No. How do we get the question, Madam President? Are you coming to the floor? Please go ahead. Thank you. That question, sorry. All right, I think as we get that, MEC, maybe let me get your thoughts on the legislative side. You've touched on it earlier, but just how we simplify it, and in particular dealing with the non-SA issues. But another comment that also came up is that it seems like we don't have stats and targets that we are talking to. Maybe you can share some light on that if you do have them as well.
Well, firstly, let me audible again.
I hope they can hear you.
Okay, my audible now. Firstly, let me start by weighing in on the discussion on issues related to regulation. I think the past year has taught us very well that, in fact, it is important to operate within a regulatory and regulated environment, because it is easier to ensure that people are able to access, whether it's resources or mechanisms created by government within a regulated environment. It's a lot more difficult to do things objectively when you are implementing outside the non-regulated environment. Let's take an example about an announcement in the past week. So government says we will extend the test scheme, the temporary employment release scheme, for 4 months to people that have been affected by the riots. But the only people that can qualify are people that are on UIF. These are people that are recognized as employees. Those people who are employed but are not registered as employees are unable to benefit from a scheme that's been created. The same applies to funding instruments. So CIFA announces that we're rolling out a funding instrument to township-based enterprises, but they must produce a permit from the municipality first. And of course, we are engaged with them to say, but how to resolve this problem of permitting? Because 90% of these enterprises don't have a permit. They might have been affected, but they don't have a permit. How do we resolve that issue? We are trying to develop a mechanism of saying there can be mechanisms of verification, working with the municipalities, working with associations in communities of enterprises that can demonstrate who has been affected or not affected. But administratively, it's a lot more difficult to execute when in fact people are not registered. So there is a lot of value in promoting registration of enterprises. Yeah. Whether these are informal traders, whether these are formal traders, whether these are spaza shops, we have to promote that people are registered. On the other hand, we have to acknowledge that people don't necessarily have to fill in long forms with all sorts of compliance requirements. So the way in which we create the regulatory environment should be enabling instead of disabling. Now, through the Township Economic Development Act, we're intending to do exactly that. Reduce the regulatory burden, but ensure ease of access to the regulatory environment. Because it is easier to extend services, particularly when you're dispersing resources. It is easier to disperse those in a regulated environment rather than in an unregulated environment. The last point I want to make is that we all need to acknowledge that there are things government is simply not good at. And until we start to acknowledge that, we will continue to expect government to create these funding institutions and so on and so on. And the reality is they create more bureaucracy than ease. Because in the nature of government, we are public institutions, we account for public resources. people expect us to manage this with a particular level of prudence and accountability. So the bureaucratic requirement is much higher in government. Government is not flexible as an institution. It's not agile as an institution, and it's not going to be. So what we need to do, which is why we're introducing this wholesale fund that extends to private entities that have greater agility and flexibility to implement, so that we disabuse ourselves of being an institution that can resolve all the problems. Because that's not what we are good at. Let's do the things that we are required to do, which is policy development, creating regulatory mechanism, creating support, and trying to do it ourselves. I think, as we've demonstrated over the past, we're simply not good at. So let's create an environment to enable the private sector to do it and resource them. So we are taking positions in the institutions that we're now supporting, where we say, okay, we'll take a first loss position. We'll invest in the instrument. We'll take a first loss position so that you can increase your risk appetite in terms of the enterprises you're going to support. In that way, it is the private sector that can apply its mind more objectively within a policy framework of what to do and how it can extend these services.
Wow, that's quite incredible. Thank you very much, MEC. And I think because we're just about to wrap up, as you think about how government can play best its role and how it can work closely with private sector, I'd like you to share some of those parting shots so that when we walk out of here, we've got tangible solutions that we are all committing to, that we're actually going to put to work. It's also going to put ABSIP to the test to say, after these imbizos, what actually did we do with, let's say, the offer that you extended to say, we would like to work with private sector. So I'd like to come back to that. There are two more questions that I'd like to take, and then to my panelists, I'll be asking you for your closing remarks. So if we can just think about today that we should hold on to, expand, and what should be the next steps as we try to unlock this township economy. So give that some thought while I take a question from the floor. Madam President, I think you're going to pose it for us.
Yes, no, thank you very much, now, I'm thinking now because you might have been calling me now. And I want first to commend for the thinking. That for me sounds very pragmatic and probably not overdue. In terms of the how we're going to implement our government policy objectives. You will recall, MEC, that I said that our marching orders from our members and from the conversation we had last week with more than 1,500 people in townships across the country was that we were going to come back to them with, this is exactly what we're going to do, this is when we are going to do it, this is how we are going to do it. This is now under ABSIP. So I'm almost there, it's not a challenge per se, but I almost am hoping that in your closing remarks, you will then say, on Monday, we will call ABSIP or whichever other institution you think is relevant, and we will talk to them about how we build the human resources capabilities in the township, right? I made reference or an example of a technology skills academy, because I think it's behaving them across every township. And how are we going to get capital into the hands of the people that need it? And last week we had people in the township running stock sales and things like that, which are traditional African systems to save money and to also provide value to the economy. So we want to go back to that membership base, say, okay, anything else is that on Monday we are looking to do 1 to 3, on Friday we're going to do what we should do. I hope that I've got this.
Well, that's the easiest question to answer. We can meet on Monday.
Great. You've got the commitment, Madam President. So the pressure is on the ABSIP side, it looks like.
On Monday.
Yeah, there's a commitment. We're going to start closing our panel due to time issues, but you've been listening to a lot of inputs about how we can take the township to the next level. We've got the income grant as one of the proposed solutions. We need to harness our township economy immediately. And we also need to be planning going forward to say what are the next steps that are going to help us unlock. Just share with us your own remarks of where you believe things can be simplified, some suggestions of how national thing, the competition commission from what you've observed. And with that also, just your closing remarks. Thank you.
Thank you. There's one issue that always puzzles us is the South African informal sector is very, very small compared to other developing countries. And some people say that that's one of the reasons why we have such a high unemployment rate. So we need to stimulate the informal sector as well and find out what are the impediments to the informal sector. One issue, again, I'm going back to the issue of finance. I once had supper with the Minister of Social Development in Ethiopia. They said they had more than 1 million beneficiaries. So I've never understood why our financial sector, we need to have a state bank, we need to have cooperative banks, we need to have community banks. There's no reason why we can't have a community bank for the people of Tembisa, so that it's provided at the level of the community. And I don't agree with the MEC that government can't abdicate its responsibility to provide funding. A developmental state, it has to have some kind of control over the financial sector. It's the most important issue that you see. Even in Ethiopia, the government is involved in the financial sector, and that is what is financing the country's development. So they've been very successful development finance institutions throughout the world, in Brazil, in South Korea, in Japan, and also in the IDC is quite a successful lender. And there is no reason why we can't have another lender which is at the small and medium scale. So we must aggregate the expertise that you see in the private sector and in the public sector, the stuff that the president is doing, and also in the public sector to provide. There's a huge gap in terms of financing for small and medium enterprises, and the government can't just say we're going to abdicate that responsibility. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. Supply chain finance seems to be coming up. James, your closing remarks on how the Competition Commission can be a player. What can you do immediately, and how can we tap into the FMCG sector to help expand supply chain finance, because we've seen how successful it can be.
I think the Commission needs to continue to focus on breaking down barriers to entry, opening up these value chains, and continuing to enforce on merger control conditions that make the economy more inclusive. So that is something we have to be doing, and to move from sector to sector to try and unlock key sectors and keep that focus or prioritization on ones that will make more of a difference. So I've talked about automotive, grocery. We need to look at other important value chains in the township economy and bring some important focus to that.
Thank you very much, James. DG, closing remarks from you. We need simpler ways of doing business. And we've got enterprises like the Hangout where we are today, which could actually be used to multiply the effect into the rest of Tembisa. How's the department going to help us with that?
No, thanks. Yes, we are committed. I think we can also engage further with ABSIP. I saw that in your document, you did talk about the issue of the funds. We are, as we speak, talking to the BEE Commission, because remember, they deal with all the issues around the BEE compliance. And they are funds that from the corporate sector, but those funds, they go to consultants. So we want to change that so that money goes directly to enterprise development. So there is work that we are doing in that space, but we're always open. Like I'm talking to you now, we're having engagements with the Business Association of South Africa. Remember the National Credit Guarantee Scheme that never took off really. We talking to them because we're trying to find out what are the challenges they face, because President announced 200 billion, but only less than 20 billion went to small enterprises. That's a big issue because money is there, but the problem is accessibility of this funding. So it's something that I think we need to take seriously as government from our side, because one of the things that has really not helped our SMMEs is the grants that we've been issuing. The banks, they look at credit history before they can provide you with finance. So the issue of balancing grants and loans and making sure that SMMEs are able to build up their credit history is very critical. So we are open to have any further engagements. We are engaging with the provinces as well so that we move together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, DG. And James, I missed your comment in the chat box earlier where you were offering the online survey, which I think ABSIP can also respond to, about how online markets can be made easier and accessible for township entrepreneurs. So thank you for that. I think that's also another takeaway, because that's one of the immediate things we need to look at in terms of how we simplify the systems. Thanks for sharing that. Ntatele Hotla, if I may then come to you and say, you have already highlighted the issue of planning, but you've also heard from our panelists what is currently going on at the moment. How would, while we're also looking at planning for a more sustainable township economy going forward?
I think our plans must be very much indigenous, organically uniting themselves with the strategies that townships have been using to make them function. The Stokvel economy, you know, is a big thing in townships, has been a big thing in rural areas. But the problem that happened is that monopoly capital exploited the Stokvel economy by organizing itself, and then things going into Sanlam, going into this big business. And government has not created a framework for supporting the Stokvel economy. People buy things at the end of the year, Christmas, and buy bulk like that, which is fine for savings. But the Stokvel economy can actually be very organically tied to the value chains. And if you think about Kaiser Chiefs and others as big stockpiles, we need to position ourselves in that kind of situation. Because when we take the game to where we are able to compete, then nobody can beat us. But we tend to take the game to those that have oppressed us for a long time. We will not win that game at all. And the government must make sure that it works organically with those organic strategies. So the plan must be for changing the game, but you can only change it if you are true and organic to your strengths. So that's what we need to do.
True and organic to our strengths, Madam President. That's what we need to be talking about. Let me see, last remarks from you. There's an offer on the table to say, ABSIP would like to work with you in enterprise and supply development, in opening up the supply chain finance, in planning, in implementing the Digital Skills Academy, so that it's not only government that needs to do that, but also so that we simplify opening of businesses. There's a comment that was made that it still costs 4,500 for a street vendor to become compliant for them to operate. And that in itself is a barrier. How can we as ABSIP work together with the Gauteng city region to really make a reality of our townships and to get over the line on a lot of these barriers that we've long recognized? We've been working on them, but we still haven't gotten to the other side where they're actually working for our township. How can we move that? How can we move Gauteng city region forward?
Well, firstly, let me say, you've got a key and really fast. But one of the things that we're trying to do that we always up is to reach out to the because we understand what we need. So we certainly want to and find solutions together so that we're able to extend the capacity that we collectively have and ensure that these resources and capabilities are available to our communities. You asked me earlier, are you prepared to talk about the instruments that you're working on? So without stealing the thunder from our partners, I'm just going to say that we're working with a set of property owners and property developers, some of them in the malls, and we're creating a retail finance fund. We're investing 10 million, they're investing some of their own money, and we're saying, how do we support township-based retailers? We're working with the SME Fund and the ITC on creating a financing facility for township-based enterprises. So without going through the whole list, I'm pretty much saying working with ABSIP for us is a natural extension of the partnerships that we're evolving. We are creating a fund that is, and it's targeted primarily at those enterprises that are underinsured and uninsured that have been impacted, but not limited to those, because you cannot just limit issues to where there were riots. We're creating a fund that is looking, that's a blended financing instrument. It's part grant, part loan. So it's up to 50% grant and part loan, because we're also bringing in private sector capital. So no, Tuma, we're not abdicating our responsibility. We're finding creative mechanisms of extending the resources and of leveraging private sector capital through utilizing government regulatory instruments. So we can take a position to put in a grant portion into a facility. The private sector can't take that position. We're in the business of profit, we're in the business of development. How do we enable the two things to work together at the same time? Thanks.
Thank you very much. And thank you to our panelists for your time and for that very engaging discussion. Madam Chair, over to you. You want me to close? Okay, you're not going to come. All right. So I think maybe just to share a few closing remarks, I thought Madam President would come back to do that. I'd like to thank our panelists really for sharing quite deep insights into how we can solve the problem. And for me, it has to be as simple as saying, how do we reduce the regulation? And I think to the extent that we can work together with the Department of Small Businesses and Housing in understanding the legislature and the regulation and simplifying it, maybe it is up to us as private sector to do that so that we can also help bring in the capacity to enable. We need new, true, organic, indigenous solutions. We've already got them in the townships. The MEC has mentioned them. And I think it's a question of just really bringing that capacity for planning so that we can move ahead from here. I'd like to thank everyone who joined us for this morning's session. And I wish you all an engaging session for the rest of the day. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Sure.
Hi.